Hello. So we talked last time about some compatibilist positions about free will. In particular, we talked about Walter Stace's view of compatibilism, in which we sort of thread the needle between free will and determinism by redefining what we mean by free will. This time we're going to talk about a libertarian position, which tries to get us to have free will another way. So let's real quick before we get started, let's look again at the argument for free will, or against free will, rather, that we talked about a couple of lectures ago. So premise one, and this is on the lecture notes, so you should follow along. So premise one, my actions are either determined or else they're not. If they are determined, then I never act freely. And if they're not determined, then I never act freely. So either way, I never act freely. Now with Stace, we deny premise two, right? This says if my actions are determined, I never act freely. Stace wants to say, no, it can be the case that your actions are determined while you nevertheless still act freely. Excuse me. Today we're going to explore a view that denies premise three. We're going to show, no, our actions are not determined, or at least they're not fully determined, right? They're not fully determined, and even then, we act freely. So we're going to read this paper, Human Freedom in the Self by Roderick Chisholm. It's really kind of a cool paper, interesting ideas. And we're going to watch this really, just great movie called Run, Lola, Run, and talk about that. So let's get into the Chisholm a bit. So the first bit of the paper, as we've seen with the last couple, is just a bit of scene setting. And it's things we've already talked about. If we take it that free will means the ability to do otherwise, that is, to choose from a range of possible options, and we take it that determinism is true, well, then we don't have free will. And if we take it that indeterminism is true, right, so everything's just random, we don't have free will. And again, the reason we care about this is because of this moral responsibility question. On Chisholm's view, and I think he puts this really nicely, I can't be held morally responsible for shooting someone, for example, if I didn't do anything. If my desires, say, or some other internal psychological state made me do it, and I wasn't responsible for those desires, right? So think Raymond Shaw in The Manchurian Candidate, think Charles Whitman in the UT shooting. If my desires made me do it, but I wasn't responsible for my desires, then I didn't really do anything, any more than if someone else had made me do it. So too, if I did it because of something random, then I didn't really do anything either. But if the concern is whether we can assign blame to me for having done something, then there needs to be some point at which I, myself, make some kind of decision. So I make some kind of choice. I'm the one having done it, or who's done it. Chisholm's suggestion is to say that events are partially determined by previous events, including things like desires, hopes, other psychological states, and so on. But he wants to say that at least one of the events is caused not by another event, right? So it's not some long chain of events. There's at least one event that's caused by something else, namely the agent, the individual, the person who's done the thing. Chisholm's view, his libertarian view, is called the agent causation view for this reason. So as he puts the point nicely, he says, quote, if a man is responsible for a particular deed, then there is some event or set of events that is caused not by other events or states of affairs, but by the agent, end quote. The idea here is that we are, in some instances at least, prime movers unmoved is the phrase he uses. That is, we as agents are the imminent cause of at least some events. We're the point of the causal chain in the beginning. We're the first link, as it were, in the causal chain. So consider the Aristotle example that he uses. A staff moves a stone, a hand moves a staff, and a man moves the hand. The causal chain bottoms out, as it were, in the man on Chisholm's picture. Now, good thing, I think this gets us the kind of moral responsibility that we all want. We can say that I'm responsible for an action insofar as I eminently caused the action, not transiently caused it, right? So I'm the beginning of the causal chain, I caused the action. So if I shoot the man when I could have done otherwise, I'm responsible. But if I shoot the man because someone or something made me, then I'm not. And this seems like the right result. And again, let's think about these cases from Walter Stace. Or if we take up Walter Stace's view, I think this gets the Raymond Shaw Manchurian Candidate case right. He's not responsible for the murders he commits while activated, but he is responsible for killing his stepfather and mother. I think this also gets the Whitman case right. He's not responsible for the murders he committed while suffering the side effects of having a massive brain tumor. I think it also gets the addiction cases right. So what we've done here is we've said, okay, you have determinism, and we've been interpreting that as like full determinism, right? There's no room for anything else. Everything is fully determined. What Chisholm wants to say is determinism, yeah, but not full determinism. There's some point at which the agent can enter the chat, as it were, in an uncaused way and be the beginner. He or herself can be the beginner of causal chains such that they count as being the cause of the event and the agent causes that chain. So we get a lot of right results out of this. Moreover, we get to say that it's not merely our desires that cause our actions. We cause our actions. For background, this has happened. A lot of this discussion is happening in the 1950s when sort of the view of mind du jour was this behaviorism idea. So from B.F. Skinner, if you've taken any science psychology classes, this idea that we behave in sort of very deterministic kinds of ways. You give us certain inputs, we give you certain outputs. And it seems like behaviorism is false. I don't think there's any real behaviorist anymore, but a lot of what was happening at the time that Chisholm and Stace and other people were writing was that behaviorism was kind of the whole thing. And on that view, it's just like we're just little desire machines, essentially. Like all we're doing is we have desires, we want to satisfy them. Chisholm's view lets us say something otherwise. Say, no, we're not just at the sole mercy of our desires. Like we're doing some choosing. We're making some things happen. And this, I think, kind of makes sense of how we feel about it. So I might desire to do such and such thing and nevertheless refrain from doing so. And I'm the one that did that. Now, this isn't to say the Skinner people or the people who think desires are like what's really the motivating thing can't say anything. There's something they could say about competing desires winning out. But I think the attractive thing about Chisholm is that it's this notion that I'm the one doing the thing. I'm not beholden to anything other than myself. And I like this view, sort of cards on the table. I think that if we're going to have more responsibility in the way that we want, I think something like this has to be the case. It just seems like any of the compatibilist pictures that we look at don't really get us the kind of justification for our systems of assigning praise and blame in the way that this does. So I think we get a lot of good stuff out of Chisholm, but I think there's a big reason to worry about the account. We're going to talk about that now. So in particular, it's just not at all clear how something like this is going to work. In fact, it's kind of mysterious, right? It seems like what goes on, at least based on our current understanding of neuroscience, is something like there's a neural state in our brains for which we're not responsible, which causes some further neural state, which causes some further neural state, and so on. And at no point does it seem like there's room for this sort of mystical agent to enter into this. On Chisholm's picture, it seems that we have to be responsible for that initial neural state. But if the mind just is the brain, and our conscious states are themselves the results of brain states, which is what many philosophers and neuroscientists think, then it's just not at all clear how the mind can cause anything in the brain. And if that's true, if it's true that the mind or mental states or whatever you want to call it have no causal efficacy to sort of change neural states, it's the other way around. Neural states entail brain states or mental states, but not vice versa. Then I think it's just not obvious how a picture like this is going to work. So it does get so what's the upshot? It gets us the results we want, but it does so in a way that seems kind of spooky, seems kind of woo-woo, you might say. And here it's worth taking a step back to think about other ways attempts to solve philosophical puzzles can go awry. Recall we started this whole unit with this tension between the fact that it seems like we're the ones doing things on the one hand, and the fact that we live in a deterministic universe on the other, right? We have this tension between these two things. And we need to resolve it because we want to make sense of our practices of assigning praise and blame and moral responsibility and all this kind of stuff. If we bite the bullet, as Holbach does, then we can't make any sense of moral responsibility. So that seems right out. And anyway, as Stace shows, like even people who say there is no free will and so there's no moral responsibility still act as if making moral judgments and assigning praise and blame make perfect sense. So Stace wants to say, oh, well, what we have to do is we have to change what we mean by free will. It's this thing that is based on our immediate psychological states. But we saw that that goes awry in one kind of way, right? It gets us, it classifies as free things that we intuitively think are not free. Addiction, brainwashing, these sorts of things. But the Chisholm picture, it does another thing, right? It gets us what we want. It seems to get the results right in a way that Stace doesn't, but it has as a consequence this kind of spooky, woo-woo, maybe counterintuitive thing about like agents and how they interact with the brain and like what it is we're doing. We're sort of over and above the determinism in a way that is sort of like, how do you explain that? So we can go wrong by sort of including too many things, like getting the wrong results, or we can go wrong by getting the right results in a way that's not really tenable. So I think there's a lot to say here. I think this would lead us pretty far afield into stuff about theory of mind and mental causation, all these kinds of topics, which if you're interested in, you should take a course in philosophy of mind. It's pretty fun stuff. It's not my jam, really. It's not my favorite stuff, but it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty important, and I think it's worth having a look at. So in the last couple of minutes here, we're going to say a bit about the film, and then we're just going to wrap up the whole unit on free will. There'll probably be some repetition, but there won't be as much as if you were in a big old lecture hall, I'll tell you that. So let's talk about the movie. So I really love this movie. I watched it for the first time in 2004 in my intro to film class when I was an undergrad the first time many moons ago. I think it's a really great movie, and I hadn't watched it since. So it was really a joy to revisit this. And I think it has some interesting things to say about free will. So I think, in particular, the world in which the film takes place, I think, presupposes that determinism is false, which I think is kind of cool. So why do I say that? Well, what's determinism say? Determinism says that the laws of nature plus the initial states of the universe guarantee the outcomes. And as a result, if you rewind the universe back and replay it, it's going to play out just the same. But that's not what happens in Run, Lola, Run. We rewind the universe a number of times, and things play out quite differently. But it's not as though there's no determinism at all, since the things that Lola does in each of the 20-minute stretches while she's on her run sort of do impact future events, right? So, for example, when she runs around the corner and she runs into that old lady, right, the first time the old lady like says something mean and like she becomes like a bag lady and like steals a baby or something I wasn't quite sure, but something bad happens. This next time she runs by, the lady is less mean, but then like mean under her breath, and then she wins the lottery and like moves to a fancy house and has a butler. And then the final time Lola runs by, doesn't hit her at all, and the lady is still kind of nasty. And then she winds up in her future becoming like a devout Catholic, I think, sort of handing out literature on the street. So there's some determinism, right? But there's not full-on determinism. And I think what's cool about the picture is it seems very much like Lola herself is the kind of agent that Chisholm is talking about, right? She seems to have this power to influence events in a way that we would have to have if Chisholm's picture were to make sense. For example, it seems like she's deciding what to say to the bicycle thief. She decides where to place her chips at the roulette table. And things really only differ in the film insofar as she is involved. Excuse me. Notice that like her parents act the same way up to the point where she's involved. Now, granted, we can't see inside her head, but the idea seems to be, in at least some way, what we do as agents or what she does as an agent matters. And of the views we've discussed so far, I think only Chisholm's can make sense of the film. I mean, it can't make sense of like the do-overs, right? there's nothing Chisholmian about getting second chances like this, but I think you take my meaning. So to wrap up free will, so that's it, right? So just to sort of run through the whole thing again, we seem to make choices, but determinism seems to rule that out. So what do? How do we make sense of moral responsibility? We considered a few ways of responding to the problem: incompatibilism, compatibilism, and indeterminism. We then show that each of these views has something about it that makes it undesirable. Incompatibilism is deeply unsatisfying. Compatibilism gets the wrong results, and indeterminism or libertarianism seems to fly in the face of modern neuroscience. The lesson here, as I mentioned before, is one about methodology, at least partially. As much as philosophy is about making these sorts of big questions and big responses and all this sort of stuff, it is, I think, more so about the ways we handle the questions having asked them. When we're doing our best, right, when philosophers are doing like a bang-up job, we identify the right question or the right tension. We clarify exactly what's entailed by the question, we specify what's at stake, and then we set about trying to resolve that tension. We then interrogate those attempts to see whether they really get us what they're meant to get us, and whether they do so in a way that is consistent with the other things we think we know. So it's a whole sort of delicate game, right? Figure out what the problem is. Figure out what the consequences of the problem are. Figure out some solutions. See whether those solutions do what they're meant to do, and whether they do so in a way that's tenable. If they don't, we go back to the drawing board. So that's sort of like the methodology stuff that's happening here. Now, whether we're ever successful at resolving these tensions or answering these questions, that's a separate conversation. I think when it comes to free will, the jury is still out. And that's going to do it for free will. Apologies in advance if there's some like stutters in this video. I'm recording not at home. I'm on the road for the holidays, probably much like you are. So if the video was a little wonky, I will take proper steps to make sure that the next one is non-wonky. Anyways, that's going to do it for free will. Starting next time, we're going to move on to questions about death and the meaning of life. And the meaning of life, like sort of more focusedly. That's not a word. We're going to focus more on meaning of life questions. We'll talk about death a little bit when we read Williams at the very end. But now we're going to get into some sort of more existentialist topics. I think things we probably wrestle with on a daily basis, and things that we sort of more often, I think, reckon are sort of the purview of philosophy. So thanks again for watching. I hope you are enjoying the course so far, and I'll see you on the discussion boards.